organization and also a group. And we have today our guest speakers, Danai, who is a compliance officer, chief compliance officer, and also MLRO from the UK. And I would like to really very thanks for her, valuable time, and who will share us about more insights about the compliance function. So I would request Danai to give us a brief, a short description of her, journey into the compliance field, and motivate us and just give us few insights on the compliance, how it is introduced, this compliance function into the financial institution. Thank you so much, Danai. Over to you.
Thanks, Hemant. Hi, I'm Danai Ngangira. I am the Chief Compliance Officer and Money Laundering Reporting Officer for Optimus Cards UK Limited. We are an EMI and e-money institution, and we provide cards and banking as a service to small and medium enterprises. I started in compliance, working in big banks, like I think most of us do. And since then, I've moved to startups and scale-ups. And in my startups and scale-ups, I have been responsible for building compliance functions from the ground up. Much of what I'll talk to you about today is going to be the lessons that I have learned on my journey building compliance functions, starting as an MLRO or chief compliance officer for a small firm, and allowing the growing the function from there, including tips on hiring and on ensuring that you have a robust function. I'll start with a quick disclaimer. I think it's important for me to say that none of what I say today is legal advice. It's important to consult with experts in your jurisdiction, experts in your product offerings, and experts in your target customer. Really, there's nothing that can be an alternative to that. This information that I'm sharing is generic and is designed to supplement to the expertise that you receive from elsewhere. So if we could go to the introduction page, please, Hemant. Okay, so in the period prior to 2007, there was that period was characterized by an increased integration across the financial system. This was international, and following the impact of the Great Recession in 2008. A significant number of financial sectors, regulators, and financial systems really globally underwent significant reform. There were new rules that were introduced that were jurisdiction specific, that were region specific, so within the EU, and a lot of sort of recommendations that were globally reaching. The purpose of these rules was to reshape the regulatory environment that we were existing in. If you recall, in 2008, there was a significant loss of confidence in the financial system, not just in the financial system, but in governments and in the regulatory bodies that were supposed to protect retail investors. And so this new regulatory environment was supposed to create a safer environment for retail customers, improve conditions across a wide range of service, and increase confidence in a severely damaged industry. The regulatory frameworks did a couple of things. So the first thing that they did was they enhanced capital requirements to ensure that financial institutions were not over-levered. They introduced new rules governing things like liquidity, competition, market structure, transparency, risk management, portfolio construction, investment activities, and corporate governance. So you can see there's not a single part of the financial sector that was not impacted by some of these rules. And the overall effect was broadly positive. It strengthened financial systems around the world, and we hope it produced the potential for further systemic risks like the ones that we saw in 2008. One thing I didn't mention, if you have a question, feel free to ask it. We have obviously the chat function. You can raise your hand, or you can wait until the end. The options are yours. Next page, please. So in order to fully appreciate why compliance is increasingly important, we need to take a look at some numbers so that we can really have an understanding of the impact that firms, small firms are facing, large firms, so that we can sort of have a deep understanding of the depth of the requirement here. So the estimated spend on compliance in the financial services industry is in the region of about $181 billion. This represents about a 60% increase since the onset of the Great Recession in 2008. So you can see with incoming regulation comes additional costs. This is the cost of hiring. This is the cost of retention. This is the cost of training. And this is the cost of ensuring that there's sufficient testing and monitoring across all of these different financial industry players. This cost, the 60% increase, is the equivalent of an 8% tax on financial firms, which sits at approximately 10K per employee. Although all these costs are incredibly high, as the saying goes, if you think compliance is expensive, you should try the cost of non-compliance. And since 2008, in the USA alone, just banks, have been fined in the region of 243 billion. So you can see the spend is 181, the fines are 243. So this is indicative of the shift that we're seeing in the financial services industry. There's less emphasis on the front office positions, less emphasis on sales, and more emphasis on ensuring that there is strong compliance on the back end. Next page, please. So we're going to focus on this page on the three, on the pillars on the right-hand side. So the chart shows three expectations. The darkest color on the bottom shows firms who are expecting to spend the same amount next year as they do today on compliance and compliance activities. The middle color shows an expectation that is slightly higher spend on compliance and compliance activities than there is today. And then the lighter color at the top shows firms who expect to spend significantly more. You'll see that this is out of 100. There are very, very few that you can see that there's a gap where they expect to spend less. So it's clear with the onward march of compliance and the onward march of the regulatory environment internationally, particularly for companies that want to add to their product set or add to their jurisdictional base, and most have to do this in order to be competitive, the costs are going to continue to rise. Next page, please. So where should we begin? It's all well and good to talk about what to be afraid of, what to be worried about, what to be cognizant of. But the purpose of this talk today is to provide some practical, applicable hints, tips, and generic rules to ensure that we can create a robust compliance function. There are a few things to outline. The first is that compliance is not a one-size-fits-all. A compliance program needs to really reflect the needs of the individual business. And because of that, we expect that those needs will change. We expect that businesses that are growing, that are providing services to new customers or new customer types, new jurisdictions, or obtaining a number of different licenses, that the needs of their compliance program will change. This training is hopefully going to give you some tips on how to ensure that your program grows and changes along with your organization. And as I mentioned before, it's important always to seek and receive external support, particularly as you go through those changes in the organization, to ensure that you always have the expertise that's required for you and for your team. Next page, please. So today I'm going to talk about the three pillars of good compliance. So there are three pillars of compliance, as I call them, that center around three main topics. The first is people. Second is processes, and the third is technology. Your biggest asset in building any compliance function is the people around you. This means the individuals within your team, the individuals within your organization, and also the individuals within your network. As a chief compliance officer or as a senior compliance officer, you are often the expert in the building. It can be very lonely, but it's not possible to know everything. It's also not possible to be all over the business at once. So we'll talk about this in a bit more detail, but I'll give some hints and tips on how to grow your network, on how to ensure that the organization is proactive, and to ensure that they provide the necessary escalation to you in your senior compliance role to help you fulfill your obligations and your duties. The next pillar is processes. This is where the work of compliance gets done. This is ensuring that you have a compliance diary or a list of compliance activities that ensures that you are constantly assessing the risk to your business, that you are creating mitigations and controls that are appropriate for your business, that you are escalating as necessary to your board, to your external support, or to your executive committee in good time, and to ensure that you can create, test, and refine a 3 lines of defense system where this is appropriate. Now, I've worked, as I mentioned, in startups and scale-ups, where we are too small for 3 lines of defense. And this just proves my point about the importance of right sizing to your organization and the needs of your entity. It's important not to add bureaucracy where it's not required, and to ensure that you are being appropriate. And then the final one is technology. We all use technology in compliance, probably increasingly so. Reg tech, transaction monitoring, all sorts of different technological tools that we can use, and it's incredibly important to select and calibrate your technology to meet your needs. It's one thing to get a system in, but if it doesn't calibrate and catch the things that you want it to, it'll be useless. And it's important to ensure that you are constantly reviewing the capabilities of your technology. As you grow, you may need different tools, more sophisticated tools, in order to help you meet your requirements. So next one, please. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about the people pillar that I had mentioned, and this is probably, as I mentioned, the most important tool that you have. So the first thing I would do, building or reviewing my compliance function, is I would carry out a skills mapping exercise. So you would list all of the skills that you require within your department. You would ask everyone within your team or within your department to then complete that skills mapping exercise. This is important for a number of reasons. Number one, it allows you, if you are hiring, to hire for the gaps and to make smart, informed decisions on how you deploy your firm's capital, but also to ensure that as a team you have all of the required expertise. It enables you to identify the areas of training that your team requires. So it helps you to understand your team's strengths and weaknesses and what you can do to fill those gaps. Skills mapping also helps you to see if your compliance function is currently calibrated to the needs of your business. If nobody on your team knows about investment and you're an investment firm, obviously that's a problem. But it enables you to understand if actually you are meeting the needs of your business. And it also enables you to build a business case for the business. So if as part of your annual MLRO report, you're required to talk to the business about the resources, and a skills map will help you to talk about that with significant detail. Another feature about people is the independence of the compliance function. So the compliance function, although we are integrated with the business is our customer, Unlike other parts of the business, sales or business development who go out and seek customers, our customer as compliance is the business. So we need to consider whether we are giving them a good service through our response times, the quality of our advice, the depth of our knowledge. And one of the key things is the independence of the compliance function. There's always a tension in compliance between wanting to be wanting to consider the needs of the business. Businesses need to make money, and so compliance cannot say no to everything. And on the other hand, wanting to do that safely. So it's incredibly important to ensure the independence and the potential conflicts, and to resolve conflicts that relate to the compliance function in order to be able to provide that good service. Yes, there's a question.
I have
Yes.
one question.
Sorry,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Hemant, I had one question, Danai, that have you come across any kind of a real life situation where, you know, business is conflicting with the compliance, and how do you manage them? Because I know that this is a real-time situation where compliance has the focus in terms of ensuring the regulatory adherence, while the business has a business mindset and profit and loss books of account to take care as well. So any real-time, you know, cases that you think will be a best practice for us? And thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Absolutely. So yes, I have had this exact scenario happen to me. I worked for a business that allowed their customers to take on an agency status in the UK. If you are an agent, you have the capacity to use the permissions of your principal firm, but that principal then steps into the shoes of the regulator. So if, for example, I'm company ABC and this company XYZ, I am for the purposes of this example, I'm an asset manager, and the company that is the agent has not gone through the regulatory process, but through using our license, they can provide those services. We had an agent that was delinquent in multiple things. So the first thing was we would do a monthly compliance monitoring. We would review their onboarding and their regular practices, just as you would, not so much as the regulator would do, but to ensure that the regulatory standard was being met. And we found that there were multiple deficiencies. They did not have a robust customer risk rating assessment, which meant that they were incorrectly risk rating customers and then allowing them to transact on that basis. They did not have sufficient record retention. So they would say somebody went through our onboarding, they did a selfie check, they provided us documents, we would ask for that, and they wouldn't have it, or they wouldn't provide it. And they underwent 2 annual audits, external AML audits, where they were found to have failed on the same item twice. So it showed that there was no remediation, and it was also a material item. In compliance, we made the recommendation, number 1, to remove their agency status, and number 2, to remove them as a customer entirely. We felt that the risk that they represented, particularly for things like risk rating and then allowing customers to transact, was really significant. It was exposing us to risk. And rather than us lose our license, it was better for us to terminate them as an agent, notify the regulator of our findings, and explain why we had removed them. The business at the time that I was working for was undergoing some change. So they did not have a high number of high quality customers. So they couldn't afford to remove this agent. And of course, that's a significant risk, right? So the business wants one thing, they want to keep them and try to remediate. I, in compliance, have said, I've done my best. They're not engaging, and they're not providing the necessary evidence of progress. And so what I did was I took it to the board. We had a monthly board meeting. In compliance, you report directly to the board. I mentioned my findings. Actually, the chairman of the board had significant compliance experience. He had been head of compliance for a number of different international banks. And when I explained the situation and the risk, I didn't say the business wants me to do this and I want to do that. I just explained the situation and the risk. And the board made the determination that it was not something that we should pursue. So it wasn't that I had a direct confrontation with the business. I essentially just explained the scenario, explained the importance of this directly to the board, and the board were able to, because particularly this individual was the chair of the board. He does and an independent non-executive director, so he didn't have any hesitation in doing what was best for the company in the long term. That was how I was able to get around it. These situations are very difficult because often it's sales, business development, the CEO sometimes, who wants to retain the customer and retain the funds. But in a situation where you are essentially in a tie, I would always take it to the board. If you take it to the board and the board choose to risk accept it, you can do that, notify the regulator of the outcome of the 2 audit findings, and then you've done enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Dani. That's helpful. That's really helpful. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Hemant,
great. Let me reshare my screen.
Oh, thank you. And then the final point to talk about people is creating a compliance culture. So it's really important to create a culture where top-down compliance is prioritized, and where learning is encouraged and reporting is easy. When I say reporting is easy, use all of the tools available to you. Something I like to do is I have something called compliance office hours. I have time in my diary every Monday that's bookable in 15-minute slots. So if anybody in the building or in the business has any compliance concerns, they can come to me within those bookable slots. It doesn't show as who has booked time in my diary, so you have that capacity to speak to me one-on-one. We also have an anonymous whistleblowing tool within the business. You can pay for these. There are services that provide this whistleblowing capacity. Or if you, like me, work in the Google environment in my professional work, you can create a Google form that allows you to allows people to report things anonymously. And one of the sayings that I like to use is to make telling the truth cheap. It's really important if somebody in the business comes to you with a concern, with a question, with a query, for you not to react in a way that will make them regret it. Part of our role in compliance is a pastoral duty of care. We need to be empathetic, we need to be open-minded, and we need to be welcoming to any input from the business, whether that's positive or not positive. Thank you. Please move to processes. So processes, this is the practical doing part of the compliance work. It's incredibly, incredibly important. For me, I think the most important thing that you could do in compliance is to carry out risk assessments. And these are multiple risk assessments that are ever changing. You need to first understand your regulatory parameters. So what am I allowed to do? For example, I'm currently working for an EMI. There are certain activities that we are allowed to carry out and others that we're not allowed to carry out. So it's important to understand the parameters of your regulatory permissions and ensure that you act accordingly within them. Then you need to carry out your risk assessments. So the first one is a jurisdictional risk assessment. Do you reside in a jurisdiction that is low tax? Are your customers primarily in a jurisdiction that is low tax? It's important to consider all of these items when you are looking at jurisdictional risk assessments. Look at sources like Transparency International, Know Your Country, FATF, and also the AML risk assessment that is published by your financial intelligence unit in the country. I live in the UK, and we get an annual AML risk assessment that is published and available. So when doing your jurisdiction risk assessment, all of these items should be considered. Also things like whether or not there are any conflicts, any embargoes, sanctions, things like this. The next one, the next risk assessment that you need to carry out is your products and services. People often talk about new product approval and the new product approval process, but it's just as important to have a product withdrawal process. It's important to delineate and articulate the roles and responsibilities with new product approvals and withdrawals. It's important to ensure that all products and services are within your permitted activities. And that if you're doing these with a partner, if you are using somebody as a route to market, that you clearly delineate who is responsible for what, because there are many things that you could fall down on. So for example, if you are partnered with another organization and you are both providing regulated services, who handles the regulatory complaints? How do you notify of a data breach? All of these things need to be clearly delineated as part of your product and service risk assessment. Then you need to carry out, for the business, you need to carry out a training needs analysis. So you need to understand, what training do I need to provide to my organization this year, this month, this quarter? You need to understand the needs of the business, and all the other factors that I've already mentioned, your jurisdiction, your product and services. You need to consider the mediums that you're going to provide your training in. So you need to provide onboarding training for new staff, annual training, and then there will be specialized training by role. So if you have a customer service team, you might provide them training around customer satisfaction, around handling complaints. For your senior executive team, you might provide them training on product governance, market abuse, and other regimes that are targeted at senior management. So for example, in the UK, there are some regimes, senior management and certification regime, for example, where the senior managers take on accountability and responsibility for the running of a regulated firm, and you need to ensure that they are adequately trained. And then for your sales team, again, you might think of providing specialized training on things like market abuse. If you work in finance, in investment, things like churning. If you work in payments, things like smurfing, all these risk factors to look out for. You need to run a risk assessment on your target market. So you need to consider, are there any inherent risk factors within your target market? If you are providing finance to a sector of the population such as subprime retail investors, their needs are going to be significantly different than if you're providing services to a financial services industry player, in which they will have significantly fewer protections. You need to consider the information needs of your target market, and you also need to consider whether the activity of your customer is inherently high risk. So if you service crypto firms, for example, they are inherently high risk. You will need to carry out a target market risk assessment that reflects these risks, and that is defensible for in the event that you are reviewed by your regulator or audited. You need to carry out, as part of your processes, compliance monitoring and assurance. This is incredibly important to test the efficacy of your controls and mitigations. You need to ensure that you are capturing all of your risks in a business-wide risk assessment that will encapsulate all of this. And this business-wide risk assessment should be provided both to senior management and to the board. It should contain your recommendations, your significant understanding of the risks, any horizon scanning for any incoming regulations that will impact you, as well as any successes or significant failures. I say failures, but missed targets or big misses, breaches of the year just gone. As part of your processes, you also need to ensure that you have full record keeping. This is essential for an audit trail, full audit trail. And as part of your processes, you should also ideally have an external audit from an expert provider on an annual basis. I always say yes, and particularly getting the funds from the business can be difficult for this, but it's important to note that it's better for the external auditor to find a failing, a breach. It's much better for them to find it than for the regulator to review and for the regulator to find it. So the cost of an annual audit, yes, might be expensive or might be more than the business wants to pay, but it's cheaper than the reputational damage that your business will take. It's cheaper than the regulatory fine, as well as the likely expensive remediation project that will come with a regulatory finding. And then, next page, please. The final pillar of the 3 pillars of compliance is technology. It's important to calibrate your technology tools and to calibrate them correctly. Because using the right tech tools, whether that's for onboarding or ongoing monitoring, is going to make the difference. Technology does not cure everything if it's not applied and used properly, and if it's not reviewed regularly. So the use of technology allows for appropriate decision making, and it allows for us to have a clear view to the past. So it'll allow us to track statistics, trends, things like this. Technology also allows us to keep costs down. It's cheaper under most circumstances to have a tech tool than to have people in a room. If you are working in a small business like I am, paramount to the business is cost. It's very easy for small businesses to fail. So paramount is the consideration of cost and ensuring that you can ensure lean growth. Lean growth, however, that is not at the expense of a robust compliance culture. So when you're looking at technology and technology tools, it's important to understand and to select a product that will grow with you, that will allow you to make changes as your customer types and numbers change and grow, and to ensure that you don't get stuck into long-term contracts that no longer serve you. And then the final thing is a robust technology suite will allow you to learn from previous lessons. Like I mentioned, allow for records retention and to ensure that your rationales and decisions are recorded in real time, whether that's a decision on a customer, whether that's to onboard or offboard, whether that's a decision to change certain things like de minimis payments and things like this. Having a solid technology partner will enable you to have a full and complete record of your customers, your activities, and the decision-making process.
Great.
And that brings us to the end.
Great. So guys and team, we are open for any questions. So if you have any questions, so we can, we have parked this 10 to 15 minutes before end of the session for any kind of questions on compliance or how do we progress into career into compliance or any other things.
I have some of these materials that I've mentioned. So I have, for example, I have an example of risk assessments, skills maps, training needs analysis. If anybody needs any help or if anybody would like to take a look at some sanitized versions of those documents, do let me know. Yeah.
Hi, yeah, I think we have one question from Marcia. Yeah, Marcia, please go ahead.
Sorry, it wasn't a question. Sorry, it wasn't a question, but I do like the offer that Danielle just mentioned about the documents that she could share. So if we could get a copy, that would help individuals that are coming out of the big banks and going into the small environments. Thank you. And by the way, your presentation was so practical. You can actually visualize doing some things that were not already done within my organization. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I was really trying to focus on not just the theory, but what to do and how to do it. So I'm glad. And yes, if you reach out to me, I'm in the AML custodians group.
Okay.
I will share documents with you.
Yeah. And the great thing about all the participants now is like everyone joined from our internal group and all are like, working as a compliance in the senior management roles. So they are basically they understand more in a deeper levels. So we can interact now for more 10 to 15 minutes, and let us know if you have any questions or any other topic to discuss.
I like the fact, Danai, that you mentioned compliance as a culture in one of the notes. I think that's a lot to do with a very intangible way of how we are building the mindset as well, just not from a tools and technologies. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think one of the most important things that we have to do in compliance really is manage upwards, and it really has to start from the senior level. So I try to do things like, for example, every other all hands meeting that we have, like I said, I work for an all small organization, so this is possible for me. It may not be possible for everyone, but when every other all hands, I try to have somebody on my team do a presentation. So last time we had somebody in the fraud team who is our sanctions expert on the fraud team, and I had him talk to the business about sanctions and to explain that it's not just his responsibility, it's responsibility of the sales team, it's the responsibility of everybody really. If somebody phones our customer service team, like I said, we provide cards, and says, I'm going on holiday to Iran, it's the responsibility of the sales team to tell them your card won't work in that jurisdiction. Exactly. So I try to have my team do something like that at every other all hands. I'm planning a week-long event within the business to talk about financial crime, fraud. I'm trying to get some guest speakers in. I think because compliance is so important to us, we don't understand why it's not that important to everybody else, but we also have to be responsible for making the information engaging. Often people, and we joke about it, but if you give them compliance training, they'll just skip to the assessment at the end because they just want to get it out the way and carry on with their day. But if we can find a way to make it really engaging and to help them understand that compliance is not just for me. I can't be in every meeting. I can't be at every event. Like, I need people to give me that information and to be stewards of mine. That, I think, goes a long way. I haven't cracked it. There's still work to do. But I think these are some of the tips that so far have been working for me.
Yeah. Thank you, Dani.
No problem.
Great. And this kind of webinars are, it's create a culture of compliance, and it's really add values to, to what we do in our day-to-day work as well. We have one question in the group. So, Jalaj, I think your question is related to cybersecurity, under cybersecurity related to risk management gap assessment. So, Dana, I'm not sure whether you can answer this or not, related to the one tool on AWS related to cybersecurity.
Oh, that's not my area of expertise. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah.
Let me just. No, I can tell you guys. It does come under compliance, but I think it probably comes more under information security. So there is an overlap between. Yeah, there is an overlap in some ways between compliance and information security, in that compliance often has to do something. It has to oversee some activities that the business has to carry out. So I'll give you an example: safeguarding, financial safeguarding. Compliance has to oversee that safeguarding is being done and it's being done appropriately, but it's actually the finance team who do the day-to-day. And I think with the question that you're asking, it's very much the same. So this is probably something that's ideal for a CISO. I'm not sure if you have a CISO in your network on LinkedIn, but definitely something to take to them.
Sure. Okay. So then I thank you so much for your time, and I really appreciate, you worked really hard on the PPT, and thank you so much for your time. Really very appreciable, and thank you so much once again on behalf of everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Sure.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.